Before we begin, take a breath. This story isn't loud. It won't rush, but it will stay with you. And if you find yourself still thinking about it after the last word, go ahead and like the video. If you believe stories like this still matter in a noisy world, hit subscribe. Let's begin. The rain had started just after noon, gentle at first, then steady, like it had been waiting for the exact moment the ceremony began. I stood by the window of the bridal suite at Stonehaven Estate, watching the mist roll over the trees in the distance. Everything was quiet. Too quiet for a wedding day. No music, no laughter. Only the ticking of a brass clock on the mantel and the soft scrape of my dress as I shifted on my feet. The gown was beautiful. Ivory silk, off the shoulder, tailored perfectly, by Mrs. DeLuca, the same seamstress who once stitched my mother's au dye. But the gown felt foreign on my body. Heavy. Like it belonged to someone else. My mother was resting in the adjacent room, her breathing soft and shallow. The cancer had worn her down so quickly, it still startled me how much smaller she looked now. I wanted to be with her, to hold her hand, but I was expected downstairs, to marry a man I barely knew, Graham Whitaker, a man whose name carried weight. In every corner of this state, 37, wealthy, impeccable posture, no scandal to his name, but also no warmth to his presence. I had only met him twice before the engagement. Both times he spoke more to my mother's lawyer than to me. This was not a love story. It was a contract, a trade of names and signatures, in exchange for my mother's care and a promise to settle the last debts my father left behind. But as I turned from the window to reach for my earrings, something stopped me. A small box, tucked beneath a folded handkerchief in the jewelry drawer. Wooden, worn smooth around the edges. I knew it instantly. It was my mother's keepsake box, the one she used to hide childhood photos and old receipts, she said meant something once. I opened it. Inside was a silver ring. Not ornate, not valuable. Just a plain band, slightly tarnished, with something engraved along the inside curve. I held it to the light and read the words, shaky but clear, to honor a promise. Next to it, a folded piece of paper, yellowed, creased from years of being handled and refolded. I unfolded it carefully. It wasn't long. If you find this, on your wedding day, know this was never about obligation. Your father believed in this man's family. He trusted them once, more than anyone else. He told me, one day, if the path leads there, let her choose. But tell her this is no repayment. It's a continuation of something sacred. I stared at the letter for a long time, then at the ring. My father had died when I was 11. A quiet man, strong hands, rough voice, always humming old songs while repairing things in the garage. He had never spoken to me about the Whitakers, nor about any promises. But this ring had his handwriting carved into its metal. I knew it. The knock at the door broke the silence. "Miss Tran?" the planner called softly. "They're ready downstairs." The ceremony took place in the great hall. High ceilings, crystal chandeliers casting pale golden light across polished oak floors. Guests were minimal, mostly his, silent, cold. Not a single familiar face except for the family lawyer and my mother's nurse, who stood quietly at the back. Graham waited for me at the altar, standing tall in a black tailored suit, his hands loosely clasped before him. His expression was unreadable, stern but not unkind. When I reached him, he nodded once. Not a smile, not a whisper. The vows were brief, legal, no poetry, no mention of love. I said "I do," with a voice I barely recognized. He did the same. The officiant pronounced us husband and wife. There was no kiss, only a handshake between Graham and the attorney. A pen scratching across a thick document. I wore his ring, and my father's silver one on a chain around my neck, hidden beneath the neckline of my dress, like a secret that didn't belong to this world. After the ceremony, I was ushered through the stone corridors of the estate, Graham walking 3 steps ahead, like a guide rather than a groom. We said nothing. Only the sound of our footsteps echoed against the marble. Inside our private suite, the fireplace crackled, giving off the faint scent of cedar and ash. A tray of champagne sat untouched, on the table. He turned to me finally, removing his cufflinks slowly. "You can take the bedroom," he said. "I'll sleep in the adjoining room, unless you prefer I stay elsewhere." I opened my mouth, closed it, then nodded. "The bedroom's fine," I said quietly. He looked at me for a moment, not harshly, just as if searching. Then he nodded, walked to the door between rooms, and paused. "This arrangement won't require anything more than your name, Miss Tran. You won't owe me more than that." He stepped through, and the door clicked shut behind him. I stood in the middle of the suite for a long while, my arms wrapped around myself. Outside, the rain was still falling. I walked to the mirror, removed the silk gown, and laid it gently across the chaise. Then I reached for the chain around my neck and pulled the silver ring out into the open. I held it in my palm, the metal warm from my skin. I didn't understand the full weight of the promise my father had made, or why he believed in a family, like the Whitakers. But as I looked at that ring, I felt something stir. Not fear, not even doubt, just a quiet, persistent question. If this is a promise, then who, between the two of us, will be the one to keep it? And under the hush of rain and firelight, I realized, tomorrow I would begin to find out. The first night passed with no words. I lay awake long after the fire had burned down to embers, staring at the high ceiling of the bedroom Graham said I could have. Somewhere beyond the thick walls, I imagined he was sleeping in the adjacent room, or perhaps sitting upright in a leather armchair, reading reports by lamplight like some corporate specter. When morning came, I moved like a guest in someone else's house. The estate was quiet. Too large, too silent. No creaky floors, no barking dog, no voices calling from the kitchen. Just long hallways lined with heavy curtains and the faint scent of cedar that clung to every surface. I walked those hallways, slowly, my bare feet brushing the cold tile. Every time I passed a mirror, I barely recognized myself. The girl in the reflection looked older than 24. Her shoulders were pulled too tight, her face composed like someone in mourning. And maybe, in a way, I was mourning. Something I hadn't even had the chance to lose. Mid-morning, I made my way to the kitchen. The staff was courteous, efficient, almost invisible. I thanked them and asked to prepare something simple for my mother. Congee, maybe, or toast and tea. One of the staff members, a middle-aged woman named Margaret, paused. "Actually, Mr. Whitaker asked the kitchen to prepare chamomile and chrysanthemum tea for your mother this morning," she said, almost apologetically. "Said it had to come from a shop on Monroe Street. Said she used to drink it when she lived in Brooklyn." I stared at her. That detail. It was so specific, so exact. Monroe Street. The little shop my mother used to walk to every Thursday. It wasn't something I had ever mentioned aloud, not even to the nurses. He said, "What?" I asked. "He called yesterday morning," she said gently. "Before the ceremony." Back in the bedroom, I set the tray on the nightstand beside. My mother. She was awake, eyes hazy but warm. The smell of the tea seemed to pull a smile from somewhere deep in her. "Chamomile and chrysanthemum," she whispered. "Your father used to make this for me after I had you." I didn't say anything, just brushed a strand of hair from her forehead and kissed her temple. That night, I listened more carefully as I walked the halls. I began to notice the rhythm of his footsteps, slow, even, deliberate, always passing my door around the same time, never stopping. And I wondered, why would a man like Graham remember the name of a tea shop my mother once loved? 2 days passed like that. Polite silence, distant civility, separate meals, separate lives. It wasn't until the third night that I saw him again. Not as my husband, but as a man alone in a home he didn't seem to fit into either. I had wandered downstairs, hoping to find some fresh air. Instead, I found Graham in the library. The fireplace was lit. He sat in a high-backed chair, one leg crossed over the other, a book open, but unread in his lap. He was staring into the flames, not noticing me at first. "Sorry," I said softly, from the doorway. I didn't mean to interrupt. He looked up. For a moment his face relaxed. "You're not interrupting," he said. "This house could use more footsteps." It was the first honest sentence he'd said to me. I hesitated, then stepped in, sat in the chair opposite him. The silence stretched. Not uncomfortable this time, just unfamiliar. "You knew about the tea," I said finally. "The shop on Monroe." Graham looked down at the fire again. "Your father mentioned it once, years ago, over drinks. Said it was the only thing your mother would drink when she was homesick. You remembered? Some things are worth remembering." I watched him. Not the suit, not the posture, not the businessman. Just a man. Tired, guarded, trying very hard not to seem either. "You didn't have to do that," I said. He didn't answer at first. Then he closed the book in his lap. "It wasn't for you. Or even for her," he said. "It was for your father." I didn't ask what he meant. I didn't need to. There was a grief in Graham's eyes that had nothing to do with me, and everything to do with some past promise he had carried alone for too long. We sat in silence until the fire grew low. He stood up, nodded to me once, and left the room, not coldly, just as someone who no longer trusted themselves to say more than they should. And for the first time, I didn't feel angry. I felt something more dangerous. Curiosity. That night, I took the silver ring from around my neck and placed it on the nightstand beside me. I stared at it in the dim light until I fell asleep. I began to wonder what kind of man my father believed Graham would become, and if that man still lived somewhere behind those tired eyes. The first time I heard my father's name in Graham's voice, it came not from a speech, but a sigh. It was the 4th morning after the wedding. I'd made tea for my mother again, this time from loose leaves I'd found in one of the older kitchen cabinets. She was stronger that day, lucid in a way I hadn't seen in weeks. The sun poured into her room like soft honey through lace curtains, warming her face, making her look almost well again. "You look like you slept," I said, sitting beside her. "I did," she whispered. "But more than that, I dreamed of your father." Her fingers trembled as she took the tea, but her voice, when it steadied, carried a gravity I hadn't felt before. "Anna, I need to tell you something." I nodded, expecting a story. Instead, she began with a name I didn't expect. Samuel Whitaker, Graham's father. The name hit like a dropped dish. I straightened. Graham's father. She nodded slowly, eyes never leaving the cup in her hands. They served together. In the war. My heart thudded. I hadn't known this. No one had ever mentioned it. Dad never spoke much about his service. Just one box of medals and a folded flag on the mantel. There was an ambush. Your father pulled him from the wreckage of a convoy that had been hit, carried him half a mile through enemy fire. I felt my breath catch. Your father was hit in the shoulder. He almost didn't make it. She paused, then added with a soft smile. But he made Samuel promise, that if anything ever happened to him, he'd watch over the family. My hands curled slightly in my lap. That's why Graham married me. No, she said sharply, and her eyes were clear now, sharper than they'd been in days. That's why Samuel arranged it. She reached toward the nightstand and took out a folder, old, creased, bound with string. Inside were several handwritten letters. I recognized my father's slanted handwriting instantly. In one, dated nearly a decade before he died, he wrote, "Sam, I know how strange this will sound, but should our children ever be old enough, and if the world allows, I want you to offer them a choice. Your son and my daughter. Not a demand. Not a transaction. A possibility. Built on what we believed in. Built on the life you and I couldn't give back to each other, but maybe, just maybe, they can." I sat in silence, holding that letter. The words swam in front of me. All this time, I had thought Graham had married me out of obligation. A cold gesture. A contract to erase debt. But this wasn't just about money. It was a promise of flesh and blood. Not between us. Between two men, long gone or nearly so. Carried through years, handed down like a burden neither of us knew we were carrying. "Does Graham know?" I asked. "He read the letters the day after Samuel died," my mother said. He didn't hesitate. He came to see me 2 weeks later. I blinked. But he barely speaks to me. He acts like I'm an inconvenience. My mother smiled faintly. He doesn't know how to love gently, Anna. He lost his mother when he was 12. Buried his father last year. Lost a wife before he turned 30. And now he's trying to keep a promise made in war to a man whose voice still echoes louder than his own. That evening, I found Graham in the garden. It was just after sunset. The last light slipped over the hedges and settled on the stone path like fading gold. He was standing beneath a Japanese maple, his hands in his coat pockets. "You knew my father," I said, walking up beside him. He nodded, didn't turn. I respected him. "You never told me. Would it have changed anything?" "It might have," I said, quieter now. We stood in silence. Then I held out the letter, that letter. He took it, read it again, like someone rereading a story he knew by heart, but couldn't change the ending to. "You were always going to marry me," I said. "Weren't you?" He exhaled. A long, slow breath. "Yes, but not because I had to. Because I couldn't live with myself if I didn't." The honesty in his voice stunned me more than the words. And what if I'd said no? He turned finally, looking at me with an expression so unguarded it almost broke me. "I would have let you go, but I would have spent the rest of my life knowing I failed a man who saved mine." There was something in his eyes I hadn't seen before. Not control, not pride. Something closer to grief, laced with quiet reverence. "You never looked at me like a person," I said. "You looked at me like an oath." "Because you were one," he said softly. "Until now." The wind brushed past us. I closed my coat tighter. Then, without thinking, I reached for his hand. He didn't flinch. He just let me hold it. Solid. Warm. As if the war inside him had paused, if only for a moment. That night, in my room, I took out the silver ring again. I didn't wear it this time. I placed it on the windowsill, where the moonlight could find it, and I whispered to the memory of my father and the ghost of a promise. He kept it. But I don't want to be a promise anymore. I want to be a choice. Some things don't need to be said. In the days that followed the garden conversation, Graham and I didn't discuss the letter again. We didn't revisit the past or name the bond our fathers had forged with bullets and blood. But something between us had shifted, imperceptibly at first, like a draft you can't see but feel against your skin. We shared more space now, not as a couple. Not yet, but like two people circling something delicate and real, unsure whether to touch it or let it keep growing on its own. The first time I noticed the change, it came in the shape of a chair. One morning, I came into the kitchen to find a wooden chair, painted white with curved armrests, placed beside my mother's seat at the breakfast table. There was a small cushion on it, the kind she used to have at home to support her back. It just appeared? I asked Margaret, the housekeeper. She shrugged, smiling. Mr. Whitaker brought it down himself last night. I touched the armrest, running my fingers over the worn edges. This wasn't just any chair. It had been in our old Brooklyn apartment, the one we left behind when things got bad. It was the last thing my mother refused to sell. He must have had it retrieved, quietly, without asking. Later that day, I passed the open door of the study and saw him, not at his usual desk or computer, but kneeling beside a radiator, trying to fix a loose valve. His sleeves were rolled up. His hair, usually precise, had come undone at the sides. "You know there are people you pay to do that," I said from the doorway. He looked up, surprised. Then, "Yes. But they don't know this one leaks behind the wall. Your mother's room gets cold at night." He returned to work without another word. I stood there longer than I meant to, watching. Not because of what he was doing, but because of the way he did it, with the quiet concentration of someone who didn't need thanks. That night, I came into the kitchen to make tea. My hands were trembling. Exhaustion, maybe, or something deeper. I was slicing ginger when the blade slipped. It was small, but the sting was sharp. Blood welled quickly. Before I could reach for a towel, Graham was there. I didn't hear him. "Come in. Sit," he said, already pulling open a drawer. I obeyed without argument. He knelt before me, gently taking my hand. His fingers were cool, steady. He dabbed the wound with a cloth, cleaned it carefully, then reached for a bandage from the drawer by the fridge. How did he know it was there? "Hold still," he said softly. His touch was professional but not cold. Intent. Focused. I watched him. Watched the way his brow furrowed slightly. The way he pressed the bandage into place as if sealing something more than skin. When he finished, he looked up. "You're not used to letting people help you." It wasn't a question. "Neither are you," I replied. His lips lifted, just a little. Maybe it wasn't a smile, but it was closer than we'd come before. That night, I didn't close the door between our rooms. I left it slightly ajar. Not an invitation. Not a signal. Just a gesture. The next morning, I found a cup of tea waiting for me outside my door. Not coffee. Not black tea. Chamomile and chrysanthemum. Still warm. By the end of the week, a rhythm had formed. We took our walks at the same time, though we rarely walked side by side. He repaired things quietly, broken floorboards, a crooked cabinet hinge, a loose tile in the sunroom, and I started leaving notes beside each one. "Thank you." "You didn't have to." I noticed. He never responded directly. But the next repair would be just a little more thoughtful. A softer carpet. A warmer light. It was, in its own way, a conversation. One evening, I was folding laundry when I found one of his shirts among my things. White, crisp, faintly scented with cedar and soap. I should have returned it. I meant to. But instead, I sat on the edge of the bed, pressed the shirt to my chest and closed my eyes. It wasn't love. Not yet. But it was something warm. Something real. On the 7th night, a storm came. The wind howled against the glass. Thunder rumbled far off, slow and deep. I was brushing my hair in front of the mirror when the lights flickered, then went out completely. Seconds later, a soft knock at the door. I opened it to find Graham standing there, a lantern in one hand. Just checking. I nodded, stepping aside. He entered, set the lantern on the nightstand. Its soft glow cast shadows across the ceiling. "Do you want me to stay?" he asked. Not as a demand. Not even an expectation. Just a man asking. I looked at him. Tall, broad-shouldered, collar open, eyes tired but gentle. "You can sit. Just for a while." He did. We didn't speak. I lay down, and he sat beside the bed, hands clasped, watching the lantern flicker. Then slowly, his hand reached for mine. I didn't pull away. Our fingers intertwined, awkwardly at first, then firmly, as if they had always been meant to meet in silence. Some things don't need to be said, like how fear softens when someone chooses to stay in the dark with you, like how a hand, held without urgency, can teach the body to trust again, and like how two people can begin to fall toward each other, not with declarations, but with quiet, ordinary care. Hospitals are built to be functional, not kind. Even the private rooms, the ones with polished floors and upholstered chairs, still smelled faintly of antiseptic and long nights. My mother had been moved into a hospice wing just 3 days ago. Her breathing was shallower now. Her voice, when it came, arrived like a memory, something already half fading. I stayed with her most nights. Graham insisted on sending a driver, a nurse, food, but I insisted on staying. And still, every evening just past 6 o'clock, he came. Never, with fanfare, never asking permission. He brought fresh linens, quiet flowers, warm food, books she'd never finish reading. Sometimes he just sat beside her, not saying a word, just being there. One night, I arrived to find him already there. He was seated at her bedside, his hand gently wrapped around hers. My mother was asleep, her chest rising and falling in shallow rhythms. Graham didn't hear me come in. There was something unguarded in his face, a softness I had never seen, not even when he looked at me. I stood at the doorway, unmoving. He leaned forward slightly, brushing a strand of silver hair from her forehead. Then he whispered something I couldn't hear. His lips barely moved, but I felt the weight of the words, something between a prayer and a memory. He looked up, saw me, didn't flinch, didn't apologize. "You come every night," I said. "So do you. She's my mother." He nodded, stood, walked to the window. "She reminds me of mine." I blinked. It was the first time he'd mentioned his mother. I knew from the lawyers that she had passed when Graham was just 12. No details, no stories. Just a footnote in a file. "My mother used to sing while she cooked," I said, moving to sit down. "She had a voice that made nothing feel broken, even when we had nothing." He didn't turn, but I saw his shoulders shift, just slightly. "That's a rare gift," he said. "She gave me everything she had. That night, I stayed longer than usual." My mother didn't wake. Her breath grew lighter with each passing hour. I curled up on the recliner beside her and tried to rest. And then, somewhere between sleep and waking, I heard her voice. Clear. Gentle. "He's not afraid to lose you, Anna. He's afraid to keep you." I opened my eyes. The room was dim, the monitor glowing faintly. She hadn't moved. Her eyes were still closed, but I knew she'd spoken. A moment later, her fingers twitched in mine. "Mama," I whispered. She stirred, just slightly, and her lips moved. "Your father loved me like quiet fire," she said, barely audible. "Not a blaze, not thunder, just steady warmth. The kind that holds on." Tears prickled at the corners of my eyes. "I don't know what to do," I whispered. "Then be still," she murmured, "and you'll feel where you belong." I didn't sleep after that. I just held her hand as the monitor ticked on, and the air grew heavier with something I didn't yet know how to name. The next day, I woke up to the smell of rice porridge and ginger. On the table was a tray. Tea, porridge, and a folded note in unfamiliar handwriting. She used to ask for this. I hope I got it right. G.I. sat down, still in yesterday's sweater, and ate every bite. Later, the nurse told me Graham had come in just after sunrise. Quietly. On his own. He had brought the food, checked the blankets, and left before anyone else had arrived. He tucked her in, the nurse said, voice soft, like a son would. That evening, I didn't wait for him to come. I found him in the garden again, his coat unbuttoned, standing under the maple tree he always seemed to gravitate toward. "You cared for her before I even knew how to," I said. He turned. "That's not true." "She spoke last night," I said, "in her sleep. Or maybe in a dream." His eyes met mine. She said, "You're not afraid to lose me. You're afraid to keep me." He flinched, just slightly, then nodded, as if the truth of it had finally been said aloud, and there was nothing more to hide. "I've lost people before," he said. "I've learned how to let go. I don't know how to hold on." His voice broke at the end, not in volume, but in tone, like a stone giving way to water. I took a step closer. "You've been holding her hand all week." He smiled faintly. "It was easier when she couldn't leave." I exhaled, then reached for his hand. He let me take it. "Hold mine," I said, "while I'm still here." He did. Without hesitation this time. That night, I went home alone. But I left the door between our rooms fully open. Not because I was waiting for him, but because I didn't want him to wait outside anymore, in the quiet of my own bed. I remembered my mother's voice, soft and firm. "Don't wait for fire. Love rarely arrives with thunder. More often, it shows up in the way someone remembers your tea, the way they show up when they don't have to." And somewhere between that thought and the sound of wind brushing the windows, I began to feel warm again, not because someone lit a fire, but because someone had stayed long enough to tend it. It was after midnight when I heard the knock. Not loud, just a soft, two-tap rhythm that barely broke the quiet. I had left the door, between our rooms, open again, like I had the night before, though I hadn't expected him to use it. When I opened it, Graham stood there. No jacket, just a dark gray sweater and trousers, barefoot. He looked tired in a way I hadn't seen before, not the kind that came from too many hours at a desk, but the kind that comes from holding in too much for too long. "The storm's back," he said simply. I hadn't noticed. But now I could hear it, the rain pattering against the windows, the wind slipping through the branches. "Do you want to come in?" I asked. He hesitated, then nodded. I had lit a candle earlier. It flickered softly on the nightstand, casting golden light onto the walls, turning the white sheets on the bed a warm cream. He sat in the armchair by the window. I sat on the bed, legs tucked under me. We didn't speak at first. The silence wasn't cold anymore, just full. After a while, I asked, "Did you sleep at all last night?" He shook his head. "I stayed with her until morning." I nodded. She's resting more now, I think. She knows the end is close. He looked down at his hands, resting on his knees. I watched my father die, he said. It was quick. A stroke. He was gone before I could say goodbye. That's harder than you'd think. I swallowed. I never got to say goodbye to my dad either. One moment he was fixing the porch light, the next, gone. He looked at me then. Really looked. Like maybe this was the first time he'd seen the version of me who carried quiet grief in her pockets. Did you ever hate him? Graham asked, voice low. For leaving. It was a surprising question, but I answered honestly. Not hate. I was angry. But mostly, I missed the way he made the world feel safer than it was. Graham nodded slowly, then he said it, like it had been sitting on his chest too long. I don't know how to make anyone feel safe. The candle cracked. A gust of wind hit the window. But I didn't move. I think you do, I said softly. He laughed, a short, self-deprecating sound. I know how to control things, fix them, buy them, not hold them, not gently. We sat there, breathing in the quiet. Rain rolled down the glass like soft lines of ink. Do you want tea? I asked. Yes. I stood, patted across the floor to the small kettle on the side table. While it warmed, I took down 2 cups from the shelf. As the water began to boil, I felt his presence behind me. He hadn't said anything, but I could feel him. Close. You don't have to fix me, I said, still facing the kettle. I don't think I could, he said behind me. I turned. He was closer now. Not reaching. Just waiting. Then just stay. He did. Back at the bed, we sipped tea slowly, his hands wrapped around the cup like it was the only warm thing in the room. Then he said it. Quiet, unplanned, like something that slipped past his defenses. You've made this place feel like home. I froze. He didn't seem to realize he'd said it aloud. When he looked up, he blinked, like he'd surprised himself. Sorry, he muttered. I didn't mean to say that. But you did, I replied. He didn't deny it. I set my cup down. Graham, he looked at me. Have you ever had something change so slowly you didn't notice it was happening until suddenly it already had? He exhaled, a slow breath through his nose. Yes. That's what this feels like. He closed his eyes for a moment, then nodded once. I know. I reached out and placed my hand on his. His fingers curled around mine instinctively. There was no tension in his shoulders now. No distance in his posture. You don't have to be perfect, I said. Just honest. He turned his hand and squeezed mine gently. Then honestly, I don't want to sleep in a separate room tonight. I smiled. Then don't. We didn't go to bed like lovers. We lay down like 2 people who had walked for miles in separate storms and finally found the same shelter. He curled behind me, his arm wrapped around my waist. Not possessive, not suggestive. Just there. His breath warmed the back of my neck. His heartbeat pressed softly into my spine. I never imagined this, he whispered. You and me. Here. Like this. Neither did I. At some point, I fell asleep in his arms, and for the first time since the wedding, I dreamed of something other than endings. I dreamed of firelight and soft voices, of a home that didn't look like Stonehaven, but felt like it. Warm, quiet, ours. I woke before the sun. Graham's arm was still around me, his breath steady against the back of my shoulder. The sheets had twisted between us during the night, and my nightgown had bunched slightly at my hips. But we hadn't moved much. Not really. It was the first night we'd shared a bed, and he hadn't tried anything. Just stayed, present, steady. It had been years since I'd slept that soundly. I lay still, listening to the rain tapping softly on the window panes, to the rhythm of his breath. Slow, calm, very real. His fingers were curled slightly against my waist, not holding, not claiming, just resting there. And it was then that I realized I didn't want him to let go, not because I owed him something, not because of a promise made by our fathers or the marriage we had entered like strangers, but because I wanted him. Not someday, not eventually. Now. I turned in his arms slowly, careful not to wake him with a start. He opened his eyes anyway, as if he'd already been halfway there. His gaze was soft, hazy with sleep, and I saw something there that startled me. Not desire, but vulnerability. The look of a man who wasn't sure if he was allowed to hope. "Hi," I whispered. "Hi," he answered, voice hoarse. Neither of us moved for a moment. Then I raised my hand to his chest, resting it over his heart. "You don't have to ask," I said. "Not tonight." His brow furrowed slightly. "Ask what?" I leaned closer. "Anything." He kissed me. Not in a rush, not with the kind of hunger I'd always imagined came with passion, but with reverence. His lips met mine like a man touching something sacred. His hand came up to my jaw, fingers trembling just enough that I knew this mattered. To him, to me, to both of us. His kiss deepened as I reached for the hem of his shirt. He helped me lift it over his head, and I ran my hands down the lines of his torso, strong, real, warm. He wasn't carved like a fantasy. He was shaped like a man who had worked too long, held too much in. I loved that. His hands moved to the straps of my nightgown. He hesitated, looked into my eyes. "Tell me if you want me to stop." "Don't stop," I said, barely more than a breath. He slid the straps off my shoulders, the fabric slipping past my breasts, my stomach, my hips. I was bare in front of him for the first time. And I wasn't ashamed. He didn't gawk or smirk or take. He looked, fully, carefully, like I was something rare. Then he bent his head and kissed the hollow between my collarbones. I lay back as he undressed, piece by piece. When he joined me under the covers, I felt the full length of his body against mine. Warm skin to warm skin. He kissed me again, slower this time, like he didn't want to miss a second. His hand moved down my waist, my hip, between my thighs. I gasped when he touched me. Gentle, exploratory, no rush. He studied every reaction, adjusting with care. When I whispered his name, he closed his eyes, forehead resting against mine. "You're sure?" he asked. More than sure. When he entered me, we both exhaled at once. He moved slowly, every inch deliberate, until he was fully inside me. I tensed for a moment, not from pain, but from the intensity of it. The sheer presence of him, the way our bodies connected, filled me with something I didn't know I'd been missing. We stayed still for a moment, foreheads pressed together, breathing as one. Then he moved, gently, rhythmic, anchored. Our bodies found a tempo, no urgency, just belonging. His hand found mine beside my head, fingers interlacing. I squeezed. He squeezed back. I wrapped my legs around him, kneading him closer. The feeling built slowly from the center of my body outward. Warmth, then fire, then something I couldn't name. My breath caught. My hips moved with his. "Graham," I whispered. "Here," he murmured. "I've got you." I felt myself tremble beneath him, the heat spilling over into something blinding, consuming. I cried out softly, not in fear or shame, but in release. He kissed my shoulder, my neck, the corner of my mouth, and then he stilled. He gasped once, low and deep, and I felt him release inside me, fully, without holding back, his body shaking just slightly. He collapsed against me, not heavy, just present. His arms wrapped around me like he couldn't believe I was real. Neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. Minutes passed, maybe hours. The storm outside had faded to a whisper. My hand stroked his back in slow circles. His heartbeat slowed against my chest. Finally he spoke, voice rough with something more than exhaustion. I didn't think I'd ever do that again. I looked at him, surprised. Since, he nodded. Since her. Since before I knew how much it would hurt to lose someone who trusted me. I touched his cheek. You didn't break me. No, he whispered. You let me feel whole again. We lay there in the dark, tangled in sheets, legs intertwined. I traced the line of his jaw with my fingers. He closed his eyes at the touch. That wasn't just physical, I said. No, he replied. That was the first thing in a long time that felt like healing. When I finally slept, I did so without fear, without tension, with his hand still holding mine beneath the covers. And when I woke at dawn, he was still there, still holding on, still choosing me. The house was quiet that morning. The storm had passed. The wind no longer rattled the windows, and the light coming through the sheer curtains was soft, like the inside of a seashell. I lay still for a while, my back against Graham's chest, his breath warm on my shoulder. Neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. But eventually, life called. I rose carefully, wrapping the blanket around myself as I slipped out of bed and padded barefoot down the hall to my mother's room. The moment I opened the door, I knew. The nurse sat beside her bed, a hand on hers. Her chest was still. The monitor had been turned off. My mother was gone. Grief doesn't arrive all at once. It trickles in, first as stillness, then as a weight, and finally as something silent and heavy that curls inside you and settles deep. I sat at her bedside. For a long time, my fingers wrapped around hers, still warm. I didn't cry. Not right away. There was something strangely peaceful about her face, like she had been waiting for this moment, and had gone willingly. When Graham entered the room, he didn't speak. He knelt beside me and simply placed one hand on my back, the other on hers. We stayed that way, long enough for the pain to make space for something else. Later, after the hospice staff had quietly come and gone, and the nurse had folded the last blanket, I found a letter. It had been left on the small side table, beside a photograph of my parents on their wedding day. The envelope was worn. My name was written on the front in my mother's delicate script, Anna. I held it for a long time before opening it. The paper inside was faintly yellowed, as if it had been written some time ago. My dearest Anna, if you're reading this, then I am no longer beside you, but I hope, oh, how I hope you are not alone. I hope someone is sitting quietly near you, perhaps not saying much, but making you feel seen. There's something I've always wanted to tell you, but I wasn't sure how to say it when I had the time. Now, I don't have time, but I have the words. You are not your father's debt. You are not my illness. You are not a promise to be handed down like a family heirloom. I blinked. My throat tightened. You are not the result of duty. You are the beginning of something new. Your father believed in honor more than comfort. He loved us fiercely, but he carried his burdens quietly. When he asked Samuel Whitaker to care for us, if anything happened, he didn't mean to assign your life. He meant to protect it. He meant to leave a thread in the world that would lead you home, if you ever needed it. You found Graham, yes, through an arrangement. But that man, I have seen the way he looks at you. I have seen how he tucks blankets around me when you're not looking. I have seen him fall in love with you without knowing how to say it. Tears rolled down my cheeks now. Steady, silent. He is not perfect. Neither are you. But I think you are both tired of being responsible instead of being free. So my last gift, to you, my only request, is this. Choose him. Or don't. Choose to leave, or stay. But do it not because your father once gave his life for a friend, or because I once asked you to be strong. Do it because your soul is ready to be held, not carried. You deserve to be loved without weight, and you deserve to give it the same way. With all my heart, Mama. I folded the letter carefully, pressing my lips to the paper before placing it inside my journal. When I turned around, Graham stood in the doorway. His eyes were wet, but he didn't. Look away. She wrote it for you, he said. She wrote it for us, I replied. I stepped forward and handed him the letter. He didn't open it, just held it against his chest. I never asked if you wanted this, he said. Any of it. And I never asked if you were ready. We stood there for a long time, not touching, just standing. Then I said it. I want to stay. His eyes widened, barely. But something inside him softened. That last wall crumbled. Are you sure? He asked. Yes, I said. Because I finally understand that staying doesn't mean giving up who I am. It means giving myself a chance to begin. That evening, I lit a candle in the sunroom, the one room my mother had loved most in the house. I brewed tea, chamomile and chrysanthemum, and poured 2 cups. Graham joined me without a word. He sat down, still in his dress shirt from the morning. The sleeves were rolled, his hair tousled from the wind. He looked like someone who had been through a battle but had chosen to return to the fire anyway. Will it always feel like this? I asked. This quiet? He shook his head. Not always. Some days it will be loud. Some days it will hurt. He reached across the table, took my hand. But it will always be real, if we let it. I nodded. Later that night, I placed my mother's letter beside the silver ring on my nightstand, and for the first time, I didn't feel like a daughter carrying someone else's legacy. I felt like a woman, choosing. It had been 3 weeks since the funeral. The house was quieter now, but not empty. The stillness no longer carried the heaviness of grief, but something else, presence. A kind of hush that came when 2 people were no longer waiting for something to end. I spent most mornings in the garden. The last of the autumn leaves had fallen, and Graham had taken to bringing coffee out to the stone bench where I sat with a book I rarely opened. He didn't talk much, but he always sat beside me, sometimes for 20 minutes, sometimes longer. And every day, without fail, he reached for my hand. He never asked if I would stay anymore. He simply behaved as if I already had. We didn't plan a second wedding. No announcements, no new rings. The old one still fit, and now it no longer felt like a placeholder. It felt like a promise I had grown into. Instead, we made quiet changes. We rearranged rooms together, cleared out old storage, closets, and made space for a sewing table I hadn't used since before my father died. Graham found it in the attic and carried it down himself, dusted and scratched but still sturdy. Looks like it was meant to last, he said, setting it by the sunroom window. I looked at him. I think we all want to be built like that. He didn't answer. He just reached for my hand again. One afternoon, I returned from town to find the front door open. A breeze swept through the entryway, rustling the vase of dried lavender on the table. I followed the sound of faint humming into the kitchen. Graham stood barefoot on the tile, stirring something on the stove. The scent of ginger and broth filled the room. "You're cooking?" I asked, laughing softly. He turned, sheepish. "Trying. Thought you might like something familiar. You're making congee?" "It's not perfect," he said. "But I followed your mother's instructions, the ones she wrote on that card in the pantry." I walked over, looked into the pot. It wasn't perfect, but it was close. "You kept her card?" "I keep all the things that matter," he said. We ate in the sunroom with the windows open. The leaves outside were wet, clinging to the ground in bright amber clumps. It would be winter soon. The first snow would cover everything. But that day, the world still held color. "You don't miss your old life?" I asked. "The city, the schedule?" He set his bowl down. "I thought I would," he said. "But nothing in that life ever sat with me like this." He looked around. At the steam curling up from the mugs, at the small thread clippers on my table, at me. Nothing ever felt like a future. We didn't make grand speeches. There was no dramatic kiss, no string quartet playing beneath a chandelier. But that night, as we lay in bed, skin to skin beneath the weight of a shared blanket, Graham whispered something I'll never forget. "I married you because of a promise. But I stayed because I wanted to learn how to love you right." I turned toward him. "And did you?" He smiled, that quiet private smile of his. "Not yet, but you're still here. So maybe I still can." We spent that night like we'd spent so many others recently. Not rushing, not proving. Just being near. Hands tracing soft paths down arms and sides. Bodies curling into one another like tree. Roots learning how to share the same earth. When he made love to me that night, it was slower than the first time. Deeper. Familiar in the best way. There were no nerves left between us. No hesitations. Just this. I was his, and he was mine. Not because of a contract. Not because of our parents. But because we had woken up, day after day, and chosen each other again. In the morning, we stayed in bed longer than usual. The sunlight crept in through the curtains, warming our tangled limbs. I turned on my side, watching him as he slept, his jaw unguarded, his breathing soft. The lines of stress he always carried were gone. He looked like someone who had laid something heavy down and didn't plan to pick it up again. I reached for my notebook on the nightstand. Inside was my mother's letter, carefully folded. Next to it, I slid in a new one. It read, "I am still the daughter of my parents, but now, I am also the woman of my own choosing. I stayed, and that choice was mine." Later that day, we walked to the edge of the garden. The maple tree Graham always stood beneath had started to lose the last of its leaves. I bent down and picked one up, deep red, perfectly shaped. I handed it to him. "What's this for?" "To remember." "Remember what?" "That nothing gold lasts forever. But some things come back each year if you care for them right." He looked at the leaf, then at me. "Will you still be here when it snows?" "I'll be here when it rains," I said. "When it's gray, when it's quiet." "Always?" "No," I said, honest as the wind, but long enough to mean it. He pulled me into his arms and held me there. And for once, there was no ghost between us. No parent, no past, only this. A marriage, no longer a memory, but a life. Our life. If this story touched something in you, an old memory, a quiet feeling, or maybe just a moment of stillness, please give it a like. And if you'd like to walk with me through more stories like this one, don't forget to subscribe. Sometimes, the right story at the right time is exactly what we need to feel a little less alone.